Hey Helen, here's another video kind of going over a few of the things that we talked about when I was there before, as far as just some things to think about and remember as you're putting together a design or a slide or flyer. I think one of the things that we talked about was the focal point and the rule of thirds. And so I just kind of draw your memory back to that. When you're putting together a design, you can have all kinds of nice elements, but still not have a great design. So, like, I think this is a nice flyer. The colors are pleasing, um, and it's got interesting effects to it. It's got some scratches and things like that, but it still doesn't mean that it's a good design. It doesn't. Um, it doesn't really draw your attention to anything specific. Um, and it's just kind of an example of how having technical know-how as far as to make things look like this doesn't mean that you're putting together a nice design. Preference would be to put together something that gets the point across over looking pretty. If we were an artist, obviously the goal would be make something that looks pretty. But since our job is to draw attention to information and get facts and information out to people, whether it's pretty or not is less important than whether it's functional and effective. So while both of those are important, our goal is to make sure that it's effective in communicating. So the rule of thirds kind of tells us that our focal point needs to be in a certain area, and depending on how we lay out our design, it could be different in each case. But generally speaking, we want to use the rule of thirds, which is, let's just kind of throw some lines. Oh, look, I already had lines here. Throw some lines out there just to kind of roughly break it into, areas, divide it into the thirds. And this is not exact, obviously, but just to kind of give you a sense that this is the areas that we're working with, right? We have these thirds here, thirds here, thirds here, thirds here, here, and here. Of course, diagonally as well, either direction. So you want to make sure that your focal points, whatever it is, wherever it's going to be in one of these quadrants, right? And in this case, and I think with the flyer or the slide that we did that day I was there, we kind of generally worked in this area. And you had that really nice picture of the brick wall with the kids on the bottom. And with what we had originally, which was just some white words, it really drew the attention down to the picture of the kids and kind of drew our attention away from the information. And so even though we might have a nice graphic, we want to make sure that information is getting out. So to do that, we'd make our focal point the most interesting or dynamic aspect of our design. So in this case, so here we have, this is a slide that I did at my previous job where I did work at the church. And it was for a series that Pastor Jack was doing on the book of Deuteronomy. And so he called it Book of Remembrance. And so, I mean, I could just put something like this together and maybe not have anything great. People might say, oh, the colors are nice, but they might not get the information that we wanted to set across, which effectively is the title. And so in this case, I put the information out there, but it's not really doing a good job of getting people's attention because it's just kind of bland and doesn't really grab your attention. So the focal point, in my opinion, would be more, I don't know, like this area right here. And not really the information, but more the graphic. My eye draws to this area because it's the most interesting because it has this little jutting out area and the color contrast and all. But it doesn't really do a good job of communicating anything. So what I did to do that is I took the title and I made that the focal point. And so I used different fonts and things like this. So here's an example of using different fonts to create a focal point. And I think I mentioned before, you really don't want to use too many fonts, but generally speaking, 2 to 3, 3 would be a maximum unless it was specific to your design. Um, in this case, I used 3 fonts, and you can't tell that yet, but right now all the information is in one font. And it's not very interesting. Even if I make this larger, right, it's still not great. I mean, it's out there, but it doesn't grab your attention. Um, Even if I say I change the color, I couldn't go crazy because then it wouldn't match, right? If I sample a color from the design, it's going to get lost, and so I'm still not going to be able to get my point across. I could try to make it pop out a little bit through the use of a drop shadow. That might work a little bit. But even then, it still doesn't really grab you, you know? It might a little bit, but it's not great. Maybe I could use a gradient, right? But still, I don't know. In this case, I opted not to use the same font. In this case, I opted to use a font that was drastically different. And so let me show you what I came up with. So here's the design as I had it. And so now you see you have this big, interesting, focal point because the font is swooping and it's kind of pretty. There's the third font right there with the little design flourishes, just to kind of draw your attention to the title. And so that's what we were kind of talking about when I was there that one day, where you can make just the words based on how you manipulate them be your focal point. And in this case, it draws your attention right back to the top, and it draws you in. And so now you're going to make your way down the slide. So that's kind of an example of remembering to be mindful of what your focal point is going to be, whether it be a title, whether it be a part of the graphic. It might be that it's at points. But whatever it is, you want to make sure that that's going to be the thing that people notice. And all of the pleasant colors and the imagery are just going to be that thing that kind of initially grabs their attention. But once they look, they're going to see, the title. They're going to see, what is this? And hopefully it's going to cause them to go, well, what is that about? And then to kind of move forward and get the rest of the information. So this, again, is an example of how you would use font and size and different elements. In this case, you can see there's a shadow there, just to kind of bring people's eye to what it is you want them to see. If we were creating, a flyer for a business, maybe it would be a sale tag or free admission or something like that. But in this case, it's the title of the series that we wanted people to see and to grab onto, and to really hopefully start to kind of set the tone for what was going to take place that night, and that was the study of this book. And so the title, of course, was designed to get them to start thinking and to kind of communicate an overall theme. But in our case, as far as putting together a graphic, the title works as a great focal point to just really grab people's attention. So this really ornate font to kind of just kind of be bold and stand out among all of the other details. And that's what we use to grab onto people's attention. So hopefully that makes sense. If you remember from the 4th of July Kids Day, I think what we did was we changed just the title Kids Fun Day to be blue with an outline, and it really just drew our attention immediately to the slide. And so this is another example of how you use just the title or the font and the placement of that to just really get the point across. So hopefully that helps and makes a little bit of sense.